Some glaring bugs aside, this stage is actually one of the better ones. It's got some good platforming, some cool set pieces, and even the music is kinda nice. Like any other stage though, it has its core issues, including an auto-run section that looks cool but requires even less player input than most of the others, and of course the needlessly drawn-out combat that permeates it throughout. I do like that here and there you catch bits and pieces of architecture that you saw in disrepair in the previous stage, which took place long after this place was shut down thanks to you. Yep, this is where you meet Lyric for the first time, from his perspective anyway. Sonic and Tails make off with Lyric's map as he's preparing to take over the world, as Sonic locks him inside his own lab long enough for his fellow agents to capture him and make him pay for his crimes. To be honest, I thought this revelation was kinda weak at first. Oh, I don't mind the idea, it works just fine. I just thought it was kinda silly for Lyric to treat Sonic like his nemesis after knowing him for all of a few seconds. After thinking about it a bit though, I think it just goes to show how brilliant Lyric is in some ways. Just that he was able to deduce how to defeat someone he doesn't know while his hands are bound after getting beaten up by him. I mean, it's crazy, but well, he's had a lot of time to contemplate this and figure Sonic out, even with so little to go by. It's all he's had to think about these last 1,000 years. And for that matter, just that he was able to keep track of time for that long is its own amazing feat. Even if he's off by a few leap years or, heck, a few decades, Lyric's brain is a powerhouse. It's just a shame his ambitions are so dumb. Anyway, I know I've been dawdling around these first few stages for a really long time now, but I honestly don't have that much to say about the rest of the stages to come. They just kinda start blurring together after a while, though I really don't mean that in the way you'd think. I mean that after this point, a fair chunk of the levels to come, though not all, start to feel less like their own separate little worlds and start to feel more like one super big level. I'm not just talking about how they're all connected by the hub world. Several levels have less of a distinct theme throughout and look more like a collection of smaller set pieces. One moment you're in a village, the next you're on a river, the next you're in a cave, the next you're in another location, and another, and so on, as everything starts segueing into everything else more and more frequently. I like how connected a lot of these areas feel, though I personally think it could have been done a little better. There's a few areas that are basically mandatory, but I feel should have been made optional, like a lot of things in Jak and Daxter. That game's a collectathon, which I know will make it lose points in many people's book, but I like this game because they're pretty lax when it comes to the collectibles. You really don't need that many by the end of the game, and as a result you can skip entire levels. Not that I would want to. I enjoy every single one, even the arguably most bland places, and that's a pretty tall order to deliver. One place that's always stood out to me is this little spot on the boggy swamp level. Early in the game you can use a boat to reach an island a little ways off the coast from where you start your journey. As you go further along the mainland though, there are several points where you go through a small cave or a gorge or a stream, and you see the ocean again, even in levels that generally aren't ocean or beach themed. About halfway through the game, I came to this spot and realized I was further up that same coastline I started the game from. Like at the start of the game there's a dock, but this one isn't being used by anybody. I personally feel this was a missed opportunity to put a warp point here, and be able to sail up and down the coast. Even without that though, just imagining how far I'd come just by walking here was mind-blowing to me at the time. They didn't need to put this spot here. There aren't any other places like it after this. But this small, extra little detail put things in perspective and just made the whole world of this game feel a little more real. Sonic Boom doesn't really have any places that have that kind of effect. They try sometimes. The very first person you meet when you first enter the hub world has a troubled family history. They've been besieged for years by dark forces that constantly threaten their farmlands. Much further into the game, I came upon this family's land and it was ruined. It was at this point that I realized I must have missed someone I was supposed to look for in Lyric's factory or something when I went back in time. And then make you feel really bad for screwing this up. Maybe I could still find him, I don't know, I couldn't be bothered to by that point. I do appreciate them trying to make the world feel alive like this, make it feel more interconnected, but they do this sort of thing so sparingly it honestly comes out of left field as this huge surprise and makes me wonder what kind of game this is trying to be. But, whatever. You continue to trudge through the wilderness and several more ruins using each new power crystal you obtain to unlock more areas, and the game proceeds about the way you'd expect. After a while, some of the platforming gets surprisingly brutal, and while there aren't any large-scale secret levels or whatever, there's lots of little spurts of platforming littered around for you to get some extra collectibles for what good they do. You can completely ignore most of these areas. They're about as deep as walking off the beaten path a few feet. I'm not saying I expect the developers to completely recreate the world of Jak and Daxter. It just kind of feels like they sort of tried to, and they did it in a pretty half-hearted way. We'll get into that in greater detail in the next video though. For all the praise I gave the hub in the last video, I don't think it's anything special. I think it's alright, it's serviceable, but it's okay. Anyway, I want to talk about some of the game's other playstyles. While I don't care much for the auto-run sections, they do admittedly get a bit better as the game goes on. There are even instances that remind me of Crash Bandicoot. They also try to mix things up with ender rails, which you swing on with the ender beam, naturally. Again, it's not my preferred playstyle, but these do have a flavor that similar quick-stepping stretches didn't in games like Sonic Unleashed. While I don't care much for this gameplay, as I've said so many times, there are somewhat similar water running sections now and then. Unlike the auto-run sections though, there's no, well, auto-running in these areas. You just go on your own and breeze through at your leisure. There's no pressure to keep moving in order not to sink, as these sections begin with a character passing through a ring that creates a sort of force field beneath their feet and keeps them permanently suspended above the water. It's essentially a jet skiing minigame, and while these sections aren't very challenging, I actually quite like them. At the very least, I can't say they're cheap in any way, and they feel much more natural to me than the auto-run sections. The game mixes things up in a few other ways, for better or worse. This submarine minigame is okay, but this top view raft section can be pretty frustrating. I can appreciate the challenge, but it's pretty drawn out and wears out its welcome before it's over. Now that I've said just about everything I care to about the levels, I guess I should talk about the bosses. They're alright. I like the giant worm boss. It's got a cool design, its attacks are telegraphed just right, and I think they managed to avoid making this fight too slow-paced. Later on you fight Eggman, boasting a pretty cool new mech. It's about as much as you'd expect from him, but I like seeing how this sort of thing translates into this game's art style. Both the worm and the mech are basically the same fight though. You stun them both by hurling things at them, and then you yank them down with the ender beams, and then promptly beat the ever-living snot out of them. The fight with Metal Sonic is nothing super complicated either. You just avoid his attacks and knock these balls into him. Although I would have liked to be able to attack him more directly, I like the track they've created for this fight. They could have just made it a straight track that went on and on in one direction forever, like in Sonic Adventure 2, but this place makes you think of chariot races and the like, and that gives it a pretty epic feel. It also helps differentiate this fight from the Shadow Boss fight earlier in the game. They could have just tweaked it like they did with Eggman and the Worm, but because they didn't, it really stands out. Before we move on to the final boss, however, I still have a few other things I want to go over. Let's talk about the dialogue. I don't mind a bit of chatter sprinkled around in-game, as it can build character, but as much as they try to do that here, it's just annoying most of the time. I know I've already used this clip in an earlier part, but it really is a perfect example of a scenario that's happened to me more times than I should ever wish upon a person. Oftentimes, you'll come across an obstacle of some sort, and before you've even noticed a thing, the characters start telling you what to do with it. I could rant about how they're holding the player's hand and not giving them a chance to figure things out on their own, but in most cases these puzzles are so easy to figure out that before the characters have even gotten to the point, you've already made it past the obstacle and are well on your way to the next one, and then the characters start talking about that one. What really makes this start to become a problem is when these parts are so short and over so quickly that you'll find yourself advancing through them too fast for the characters to keep up with what you're doing. As soon as they finish talking about the last section you just beat, they have to play their next line because you triggered it 3 seconds before they finish the last one. Oftentimes you'll blow through these areas so fast that the characters just won't stop talking, and you'll have to deal with constant unending chatter throughout. I have to wonder just how long they expect you to stand there like an idiot, listening to their every word before taking a step. This is yet another thing I think was handled better in Jak and Daxter. Sometimes Daxter would speak up to tell you how something worked and or hint at what you should do with it, but this was done very sparingly. He usually only gave you that line of advice once. That first time was enough. He'd only speak up again if you were dilly-dallying for a while or screwed up a few times, just in case you didn't get it the first time. And he did it in a, geez, let's get going already sort of way. In this game, the characters are here to coach you every step of the way, and it's very, very annoying. I know what people will say, that it's for kids who haven't played a lot of video games, but any child with some sort of attention span and decent hand-to-eye coordination should be able to make it through most of this game without much trouble. I can understand being told to hit the first log, but do they really think I'm going to completely forget how I hit something when I run into another log a few seconds later? I guess so. I guess this puzzle's too much for me, even though I already just did it. These aren't even really puzzles or whatever, just the kind of, use this trick, now use that trick sort of level design we saw a lot of in Sonic Heroes. As for the actual writing, Tails, how would you describe it?
And that did not qualify as humor.
That's the entire script in a nutshell. These writers are constantly trying to make me laugh, but they don't seem to be trying very hard. Some of it's okay, but in general it's pretty subpar, and it's at the lowest when they start throwing internet lingo in there for kids who just got their first iPad for their birthday. Ugh. This whole world is just confusing to me. There are elements that make it feel like a prequel to the TV series. You meet Styx the Badger, you first acquire Tails' plane. But unless Lyric were to appear in the TV series, I don't think this game has any bearing on anything that'll happen in it. Rise of Lyric's story is made even less important by the 3DS version, which is a completely different story. It's not congruent with this game's story, it's more like a reboot within a reboot. And then there's the matter of just how independent it is from the old Sonic continuity. For all we know, there aren't Chaos Emeralds in this world. Instead, there are power crystals. How is it then that Shadow still has his chaos-based powers? Where did they come from? Why does he name his attacks that way? It's never explained. I guess it's just fan service. Of course. Someone pointed this out to me after I uploaded part 2, and I swear the more I think about this game and its confusing world, the less I know how to feel about it. I like some things about the Sonic Boom universe, but I don't think they've done a good job setting it up at all. We don't know the first thing about it or the people in it. The weird thing is, we probably could have gotten a significantly different story with earlier builds of the game, but again, I'll save that for later. Let's get back to the little things, the humor and whatnot. I don't like it. For me, some of the most cringeworthy moments come from Knuckles. I hate what they've done to him. I swear, Knuckles is losing more IQ points with every game that's released, and I really don't understand why. He doesn't have any sort of backstory or layers to his character in this game. This Knuckles was born into the world solely to be a dumbass, and that's all he has a capacity to be. It's sad. Interestingly, after I said I liked him being buff in the first part, someone in the comments said they didn't because big, beefy characters are always the dumb jock of the group. Like there just isn't enough blood to be distributed between the muscles in their brain. And for some reason, I honestly didn't think that would be the case before I read the comic, watched the show, and played the game, but yep. Anytime they hit a someone likable and down-to-earth underneath, they almost always have to go and ruin it. This is why they gave him fingered gloves, people. It's so they can make the stupid gag. Yay! The only cutscene to feature Knuckles that I actually like is the one where he slaps Sonic so hard that he knocks a ring out of him and thinks he just threw Sonic off a cliff. That kind of physical comedy is something you'd only ever see in a Sonic game made in the States, and it's great. What makes me not hate this scene, though, is that there's no stupid dialogue from Knuckles that lessens his character. He's just kinda normal here. My favorite cutscene in the entire game, though, is this one where Amy tries to get Sonic to chill out for a moment, and she doesn't make any moves on him or whatever, but he's still uncomfortable. It's a nice, subtle moment, and you could take a lot of things out of it. Unfortunately, it's the only moment like it in the entire game. Amy and Tails' portrayals are okay. Nothing about them offends me. This Sonic, however, well, not bad, is very different. Sonic Heroes aside, we've never heard him go on and on about friendship and teamwork and all that. I've always imagined Sonic just doing his own thing whenever he can help it, and crashing at Tails' place in his downtime, which they kinda seem to be going for in the show. Here though, this Sonic is all about his little superhero squad, and he says some things that I never thought I'd hear him say. I'm not saying he doesn't have the capacity to act this way. He's been a lot of things over the years, and he works with others when the situation calls for it. I just don't really think this is quite his style, but they've got to have a good moral lesson for the kids to play with others. Surely they never heard it before. Anyway, I don't really like this game's writing in general. The story is full of wasted potential, the characters fall flat, the gags are forced, and the world building is kinda lame. So it's hard for me to take a scene like this seriously. Of course, he gets up without a scratch. Whatever. The last level is filled to the brim with enemies and hazards. It's over before too long, and I really don't have much else to say about it. Like most of the levels, it's just okay. And now for the final oh wait! I just realized I've hardly said anything about Shattered Crystal this whole time. Huh. I guess I better go back to that before moving on to the finale, huh? See you in part 4.
What? My idea worked? Wait, am I smart?
What the Shut up, Knuckles!